Jesus is God. He dies on the cross. Where does he go after those? Where does he go for those 3 days before he rises from the grave?
He goes to heaven.
So I personally like to believe in a story that he went down to hell. I've read The Divine Comedy by Dante, and in that book they tell us the story that he actually went down to hell to save the souls that were banished to hell before Christianity and Catholicism was even around. So he went and saved some of the souls that he believed should be in heaven, but because Christianity wasn't a thing, they weren't able to get up there.
I think that Jesus needed to prove to, like, Thomas that this is what really happened, this is where I really was, and he did.
Hey friends, Pastor Mike here, coming back together with you in regards to our Let's Meet God series. And one of the questions that we had submitted was the question, well, if Jesus was God, then where was he for those 3 days after he died on the cross? So the best way to understand this is really to dive into Scripture and break down and try and figure out where was Jesus exactly when he died and was in the tomb. We know that for John chapter 19, where Jesus is on the cross and he says the words, "It is finished," and then he goes on to say that he bowed his head and he gave up his spirit. He said to his Father, "It is finished," and that he's giving up his spirit to God. So at Jesus' death, there was a separation of body and spirit, and we know that his body was on that cross until someone took it down, and once they took his body down, they laid him in the tomb, and that's where his body was for those 3 days, and his spirit was separated from his body for that time. So where did his spirit go? Well, his spirit, the best that we can understand, it went to the place where he describes to the thief on the cross that is with him, into the place called paradise. He said to the thief on the cross, "I tell you this truth, you will be with me today in paradise." So the question then is, where is paradise? And we find that answer in Luke chapter 16, where we have the actual story of the rich man and Lazarus. And Lazarus lives his life and as a poor beggar and dies, and the rich man lives his life on earth and dies. And later we see them, and the rich man is in what we know as Hades, and the beggar Lazarus was in Abraham's bosom with him, and they could see each other across this chasm. And this gives us the first clue as to what paradise is. See, there's 3 words in the Bible that talk about hell and that are translated hell in different ways throughout Scripture. In the Old Testament, it's the Hebrew word Sheol, which means the resting place of the dead. The New Testament equivalent to that is Hades, which is also translated the resting place of the dead. And then we have the word hell itself. For instance, when you look at the book of Revelation, we know that one day Jesus is going to be the final judge, and the place that those that die now are resting is a temporary hell. Well, there's also a temporary paradise, which is where Jesus and that thief on the cross that died went. It's also where David and Nehemiah and the Old Testament saints and Moses and Noah and all of them are or were as well, was in this temporary holding place, which we see in Luke chapter 16. So a good way to think about this is when you think of Hades in prior to Jesus, is there was this one resting place for the dead known as Hades. And that resting place was separated into 2 sections. There was one side that was a perfect representation of hell, which is where the rich man found himself asking Lazarus for a drip of water on the tip of his tongue and telling Abraham to send someone to go and warn his family about the place he found himself in. And then there was the other side of Hades, which is the paradise side, which is where we find Lazarus the beggar and the other Old Testament saints prior to Jesus at this time. And we when we see that there is this separation, this chasm between the two, those two places do not overlap. Think of it like this. It's like New York in New York, right? You have New York City in New York State. So you have Hades, which is the hell side of Hades, and you also have the paradise side of Hades. So it's one state, it's two different towns or cities within that one state. And this is a temporary holding place for the dead in the Old Testament and prior to Jesus. And then we learn later on in Ephesians chapter 4, when Christ ascends, it says that he took behind him a host of captives that went with him and ascended into heaven. When he left the disciples there on the beach looking up saying, I'm going to prepare a place for you and I will come back, we have this host that goes with him, and a lot of scholars believe that this is the paradise side of the Old Testament Hades, that are following Jesus up to heaven, where they are currently, and where anyone that dies post the resurrection of Jesus Christ will find themselves today if they have a relationship with him. The simple way to remember this is in the Old Testament, there was a temporary holding place called Hades. Hades had two different cities within it. It had the Hades side, hell side, and it had the paradise side, which is what Jesus says the thief will be with him on that day in that place. And then when Jesus ascends 40 days later after his resurrection and he goes up to heaven, he takes that host with him. And we see that in Ephesians chapter 4, 8 through 10. So I hope this answers your question. If you have any more questions, always reach out to us at impactpa.church. We're so grateful that you guys have tuned in. This has been a great series, and I hope I get to see you on a Sunday soon as we continue to go through this teaching series, Let's Meet God. Have an awesome day, everyone.